Right.
And Harrington gave an interview to Zecharia Sitchin a number of years ago. I think it was 91 or so, where he came right out and said, Dr. Sitchin, we are interested in this because it ties in perfectly with the work you've done on the Sumerians and the ancient planet Nibiru. He said, we found it, it's real, we have photographs of it.
Star, 30 million years. It's rapidly rotating. Young stars are born that way. And rapid rotation is one of the key ingredients which powers activity.
While not a threat to us, the massive flares of red dwarf stars can help us better understand the flares produced by our own sun. They are also of interest because red dwarf stars are often orbited by planets. Some data suggest that 40% of red dwarfs have super-Earth-type planets orbiting in a habitable zone, where liquid water is possible. If this is true, then they are good candidates for supporting life. However, the habitable zone around a cool, dim star like DGCVN is much closer to the star than the Earth is to the Sun.
I think, first of all, that it probably generates enough of its own heat, and I think they probably did indeed create for themselves, with the advanced technology that they have, a kind of a Dyson sphere. Are you familiar with that? Mm-hmm. You know what brilliant British astronomer, I think, Freeman Dyson, said some years ago, that an incredibly advanced technology will have the ability to enclose its planet and retain not only its heat, but its atmosphere. And I suspect that the Anunnaki have done that to Nibiru, and they probably did it, good enough, hundreds of thousands, maybe 1 million years ago. So the planet, I think the color from it, the dull red golden color, is a result of that envelope of gold shell that they've created. They've created for themselves a Dyson sphere around their planet. And
it really doesn't matter if I see a photograph of it or not. Eventually, I will see
this particular Dir sign, right? Dir sign. So I'm going to give it to you right here. I want to give it to you straight, people. They're afraid of Nibiru.
Most influential culture of the ancient world. Not the Egyptians, not the Greeks, not the Romans, the Sumerians. The Sumerians...
And apparently IRAS got 2 giant positive responses. That yes, the 12th planet, the 10th planet, however you want to call it, yes, it's...
founded the observatory was to study the planet Mars and its canals. The other was the search for other objects of interest in our solar system, most particularly Neptune's perturber, Planet X, a fact that revisionist historians downplay or paint over. Yet it was Lowell's intention to find the mysterious Planet X that led to the discovery of Pluto. In 1929, 14 years after Lowell's death, a young astronomer by the name of Clyde W. Tombaugh was retained by the Lowell Observatory to carry on the search for Planet X. And on February 18, 1930, he discovered Pluto. At the time, astronomers believed he had found Planet X, Neptune's perturber. Consequently, the topic of Planet X languished for some time after Tombaugh's discovery. However, after the discovery of Pluto's moon Charon in 1978, it was determined that Pluto lacked the mass to be Neptune's perturber, as it is only about 60% the size of our own moon. So with that, the search for Planet X was once again afoot.
Допустило существование большой планеты, которой впоследствии было дано название Нибиру.
В 2005 году американские астрофизики заявили, что на расстоянии приблизительно в 1 световой год от Земли располагается огромное космическое тело. Но главное, на огромной скорости оно приближается к нашей планете. Небесное тело настолько темное,
So interesting to note that Pluto was later demoted to the status of a dwarf planet in 2006 by the International Astronomical Union. In 1950, Immanuel Velikovsky published Worlds in Collision, and he was viciously attacked by mainstream science, even though he corresponded frequently with Albert Einstein. What generated this medieval response from modern science is that Velikovsky used ancient accounts to question the Darwinian notion of evolution with evidence of periodic cataclysms caused by large objects flying through the core of our solar system. Despite ruthless suppression, Velikovsky's work reawakened an open discussion of Planet X, and following that, a steady trickle of interest emerged, both in mainstream science and the media. On March 3, 1972, NASA launched the Pioneer 10 spacecraft to explore the outer planets. However, according to government whistleblowers, the real purpose was to find Planet X, or at least to help narrow down the search field. An interesting aspect of Pioneer 10 is that it also carried a small gold anodized aluminum plaque designed by astronomer Carl Sagan, should the spacecraft be found by extraterrestrials. At present, communication with the Pioneer 10 spacecraft is no longer possible. Following the launch of Pioneer 10, the topic of Planet X would have languished again had it not been for Zecharia Sitchin, the author of The 12th Planet, which was first published in 1976. According to his translations of ancient Sumerian texts, a race of beings living on a planet called Nibiru bioengineered early hominids on Earth to turn them into slaves for the purpose of mining gold. Called the Anunnaki, these beings lived on a planet the Sumerians called Nibiru, what we call Planet X today, and the Sumerian accounts tell us that it orbits our Sun every 3,600 years. Ancient wisdom text called the Colburn Bible, and according to Planet X historian Greg Jenner in his book Planet X and the Colburn Bible Connection, previous flybys of this mysterious object caused the sinking of Atlantis, the deluge, and the 10 plagues of Exodus. Although Sitchin was continuously mocked and attacked by fundamentalists, our government took his work seriously, and on January 25, 1983, NASA launched the Infrared Astronomical Satellite, IRAS. Its mission was to map the sky using infrared. According to NASA, IRAS was unable to complete its mission due to a failure in its supercooling system, and much of the data collected from the probe was classified and has never been disclosed. Several government whistleblowers say that this was a cover-up because NASA shut down IRAS after it imaged Planet X. Their accounts parallel an article published by the New York Times on January 30th, 1983, shortly after the IRAS launch. Evidence assembled in recent years has led several groups of astronomers to renew the search for the 10th planet. They are devoting more time to visual observations with the 200-inch telescope at Mount Palomar in California. They are tracking 2 Pioneer spacecraft, now approaching the orbit of distant Pluto, to see if variations in their trajectories provide clues to the source of the mysterious force. In a Victoria Advocate article published on June 14, 1988, NASA astronomer Dr. John D. Anderson was quoted as saying that telemetry from the Pioneer 10 spacecraft indicated the existence of Planet X. Also note that this article was sourced from Google News and was featured in Yowza.com's March 2012 article titled "The Planet X Cover-Up in the Mainstream Media." Following publication of our article, the entire June 14, 1988 edition was deleted from the Google News site. However, a complete copy is available for Yowza.com subscribers. But what is relevant here is that Anderson is a NASA astronomer with one heck of a resume, and what he said in that 1988 news article was powerful. In that article, he said, "We have a 90 to 99% confidence that Uranus and Neptune are being disturbed, and by one candidate for that is a single Planet X." At that point, our government became more interested in keeping public attention focused much closer to home. After all, if you can't see it, it's not there, so go back to sleep, America. Nothing to see here. However, a few curious minds had other notions. On October 1988, Dr. Robert S. Harrington, the chief astronomer for the U.S. Naval Observatory, published his paper, "The Location of Planet X," in the Astronomical Journal. In an August 30th, 1990 television interview with Zecharia Sitchin, Harrington also said that Pluto had been a satellite of Neptune, but it was dislodged by Planet X, which he believed could possibly sustain some form of life. He also showed Sitchin a diagram he had created approximating the location of Planet X. Following that interview, Harrington commissioned the construction of a special telescope for a Planet X photographic sky survey in 1991. Which was completed at the Black Birch Observatory in New Zealand. The New Zealand observations were performed using Harrington's calculations, and the results were sent to NASA. However, those films vanished and have never been seen again, which leaves us with a big question. Did Harrington actually find Planet X, Neptune's perturber? In 1992, Sitchin produced a documentary titled "Are We Alone in the Universe?" At the end of that film, Sitchin quotes a NASA press release from that same year. Unexplained deviations in the orbits of Uranus and Neptune point to a large outer body system of 4 to 8 Earth masses on a highly tilted orbit 7 billion miles from the Sun. Unexplained deviations in the orbits of Uranus and Neptune point to a large outer body system of 4 to 8 Earth masses on a highly tilted orbit 7 billion miles from the Sun.
This message is about comet Lyson. There were 4 comets coming in. These were not comets. NASA reported that the comets melted into our Sun. Yet satellite images proved nothing was anywhere near our Sun at the designated times. The only report that was true is that something was coming in. It's the Nibiru system. They're here in our solar system, for heavenly bodies, and they're hiding. It's true. Check this. 3 planets and a dwarf star disappeared into our solar systems. Where could you possibly hide 3 planets and a dwarf star? Our gas giants Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune. What is a gas giant? A planet that is primarily made of gas. Gas is compressible and easy to dissipate into space. All of these planets have changed appearance in the last year. Why are Anunnaki here just waiting? Because we are not finished converting our Earth into a planet worth stealing. They are not our friends, gods or saviors. This is their business. We are their slaves. And if anyone has any objections about the way mankind has been treated, I would suggest you speak up now. By 2016 a billion more will be dead. By 2039 only the few remain.
Фиксировать, сфотографировать.
После изучения параметров и траектории движения гигантской планеты, ученые пришли к неутешительному выводу. Нибиру больше Земли в 5 раз. Но самое страшное, через 3 года она может пролететь в нескольких сотнях километров от Земли. Находясь так близко к нашей планете, она запросто сможет сорвать с нее атмосферу. Ученые выяснили, что однажды Нибиру уже погубила другую планету. Оказалось, что 16 миллионов лет назад в нашей Солнечной системе существовала планета Фаэтон. Она располагалась между Марсом и Юпитером. Теперь на ее месте пояс астероидов. Ученые считают этот пояс не что иное, как осколки древней планеты. По словам астрофизиков, скорее всего, Нибиру столкнулась с Фаэтоном, когда она в очередной раз проходила через Солнечную систему. После такого удара планета разлетелась на куски.
So if this planet turns out to be in a 3,600-year orbit, then its mass will be correspondingly larger. This one here is a map of the solar system as we know it. The inner planets, this is the orbit of planet Pluto. And this here is the orbit that I have proposed for the 10th planet. And here's where we think it is right about now in its orbit.
If Planet X exists, we are not alone.
In the meantime, if you become a student of my work, a student of Professor McCanny, a student of Immanuel Velikovsky, Zecharia Sitchin, and others, you can learn the truth. The truth is, what we're experiencing is cyclical in nature. It's a long cycle, 3,600 years, and in human lifetimes, that's a lot of lifetimes, 3,600 years. You figure 4 generations per century times 36 centuries. That's a lot of centuries. That's a lot of generations. The cyclical nature of this planet going away from us for 1,800 years and coming back towards us for 1,800 years in a binary star system. I get emails from all kinds of people claiming they have photographs, claiming this, claiming that. It's natural to want to see this thing. 12 years ago, when I found out about it, more than 12 years ago, I began that quest myself. I came to realize it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter if I see a photograph of it or not. Eventually, I will see photographs that are authentic, and so will you. Eventually, we'll see the real deal here in the Northern Hemisphere.
Necessarily agree with him. You're here to evaluate what we say and decide on what you believe. I am a pro-Sitchin person, as you will see. Okay, I have studied, and in part 4 of my book, I base part 4 on the writings of Zecharia Sitchin and the ancient Sumerians. Because next slide, I believe that the answer to where we came from is in fact going to be found in Sumer, ancient Sumer, modern-day Iraq, Tigris-Euphrates River.
Right, the planet of the cross, the finding of the true cross. Well, something very interesting I noticed right here, and this is in this particular Dursan, right? Dursan. So I'm going to give it to you right here. I want to give it to you straight, people. They're afraid of Nibiru because it represents God and the throne of God. Now, you see this word right here? This is Nibiru.
Thousand years old. That throws a huge, gigantic wrench into the establishment position that we evolved from creatures that were walking upright approximately 4 million years ago. The early Australopithecines, Lucy, everyone is familiar with her, at around 3.2 to 3.5 million years ago, and they're finding new ones all the time. And all they say is to qualify as human is to be upright walking. If you're an upright walking pre-creature, you're called a pre-human. Even though all of those creatures, right through Neanderthal, from Lucy at 4 million years ago, right through the Homo habilis, Homo erectus, Neanderthal to Cro-Magnon, right up to Cro-Magnon, all of those creatures don't look anything like human beings as we are today. They are as different from us as primates. In fact, they look like primates. They look like upright walking primates. Up through Neanderthal, back to Lucy, and whatever's going to come before her. What could make something change so radically literally overnight in anthropological terms and be anything remotely associated with Darwinism. I believe, personally, that the writings of the Sumerians 4,000 years ago, as chronicled by Zechariah Sitchin in his books, The Earth Chronicles, I believe that is the most logical and reasonable explanation that there is for how we came to be.
20 some odd years ago, Zechariah Sitchin wrote The 12th Planet. In The 12th Planet, he describes ancient writings and texts by the Sumerians depicting a 3,600-year orbit of Nibiru. But the Sumerians are rarely spoken about in history books. Who were the Sumerians? And what could an ancient civilization possibly know about how we came to be?
We only hear about like the Egyptians or the Mayans or the Incans, Romans, Greeks. The first culture we have on Earth were the Sumerians, and they showed up 6,000 years ago where modern-day Iraq is. It's right between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. It was then known as Mesopotamia, Babylon, but also Sumeria, where the first culture on Earth stems. And they have left us over 100 of the first for high society to take place. For instance, stemming from Sumeria 6,000 years ago, they were the first ones to invent writing. They had a system of over 400 characters known as cuneiform text, and use a wedge-shaped stylus or an object with a wedge and would twist and turn and make all these characters that came up to about 400 characters, and they had their own complete language like an alphabet that we use today, A through Z, but this stemmed out of Sumeria 6,000 years ago, and all of the first for high society come from them. Time, the calendar, math, schools, courts, judges, systems of law, all of this originated in Sumeria, which was then known as Mesopotamia, Babylon, today's modern-day Iraq.
The Sumerians are actually probably the most influential culture of the ancient world. Not the Egyptians, not the Greeks, not the Romans, the Sumerians. The Sumerians invented, for example, the zodiac. All of the symbols that we still have today for the zodiac was created by the Sumerians. They tell an incredible story, the Sumerians do, of the Anunnaki, which is that there is another planet in our solar system, that gods, super beings, live on this planet, that these beings come to Earth. The Sumerians had a pantheon of gods, but it was living gods. They were the Sumerians worshipped living gods who lived and worked and had their lives among them. They were the Anunnaki. Among those Anunnaki, there were 12 leaders, 12 super gods, the bosses, the boss of bosses. Those 12 gods come down and are present in the Egyptian culture, in the Greek culture, and in the Roman culture. They just have different names, but they have basically the same personalities and the same functions. So it isn't that mythology begins with the Egyptians, the Greeks, and the Romans. Mythology begins with the Sumerians. Monotheism didn't kick in until the gods, the multiple gods, actually physically left.
When we look at all the stories in the Bible about how God is a feared God, and if you do what God tells you, you are given the reprisal of going to heaven, or if you do wrong, you go to hell, and it's very black and white. But the Sumerians give us a lot more context into that line of thinking and how it came about in their image and after their likeness. The Anunnaki quoted to the Sumerians as saying, "We have created you in our image and after our likeness, and we were their slaves," basically, to do as they bid it. Mine the gold, do their daily chores. We were basically their slaves.
The leader said, "We'll make you a slave. We'll make you a servant." And that's the reason, the impetus, according again to the Sumerian writings, for the creation of human beings. The story of Noah is a classic that comes right out of the Sumerian texts. The word Eden, the Anunnaki called the land where they lived the Eden. The atom, they called the worker slave that they created the Adamu, plural.
Could the Anunnaki have genetically engineered humans? It sounds incredible until we consider that we ourselves genetically engineer the fruit and vegetables we eat every day. From tomatoes to apples and oranges to cloning Dolly the sheep. If we can genetically manipulate DNA, then who's to say that we weren't created or our DNA wasn't tampered with by another race of beings in the past? Now the question is, were we? Did they? And if we were, there must be some empirical evidence, some clues left behind, besides writing in a text that points to this.
If you look at the human genome, you'll see that it looks very much like a primate genome, except the second and third chromosomes are fused into one. So, what does that solve? It gives you all the chromosomal material of the primate, but it's now only taking up the space in the combining process of 46. It is 46 chromosomes with 48 chromosomes of genomic material still in there. Now, how could nature do that? How could nature fuse those two chromosomes together in any length of time? It wouldn't happen. It couldn't happen. That was done.
According to Sitchin, we were created genetically by the Anunnaki as a worker to mine gold for them, to serve them. People out there, even if you're not a scholar, even if you're not anything, if you open your eyes a little bit to this and you start just doing your own research, you're going to find paths there that lead you to some things that are going to awaken new ideas into you. In the next few years, I think we're going to see a watershed of information that is going to absolutely rewrite every book of history. There is evidence left over this entire planet when you start thinking, and you must believe, that we are the offspring of these people. If there was a God, the God created those people before they created us. We are here because of an act of divine creation, but they were people just like us, only older, only more technically advanced. We need to rediscover that in ourselves, that we are a great civilization. We came from a great civilization. Okay. And I would tell anybody to look, open your eyes and look for it. Don't be blinded to something that's led to nothing but the slaughter of ourselves for thousands of years. And we still are at that point. We're still a warring society. When this documentary or others like it are put out there and enough people will see it, at least that will start a beacon somewhere. That will
okay, but what about Planet X?
Oh, it's a reality.
Yeah?
Yeah.
So what are they going to do about that?
Well, apparently they are concerned about, you know the story, according to Sitchin and according to the Sumerians, it's a reality. Mm-hmm. Well, our astronomers apparently have concluded that it is indeed a reality. For almost a century, astronomers have been concerned and interested about what they called an intruder that seems to come and go from time to time, and they can measure it by the perturbations and the effects on other planets. They've known its existence for a long time.
Maybe you wish to tell us in a few minutes the nature of those discoveries.
I'd be happy to, but, and you're absolutely right. As a matter of fact, the date on here, I was just noticing, is 14 August 1978, which was just about 6 weeks after we discovered the fact that Pluto has a satellite. Once you have a satellite for a planet, you can determine how heavy it is. It turns out Pluto was very much smaller and lighter weight than we had thought, which meant that Pluto has no influence, no appreciable influence on the motions of the planets Uranus and Neptune. At that point, we voiced a hypothesis that this means that there is at least one yet-to-be-discovered planet in the outer reaches of the solar system, and just naturally led directly to you and your interest in what we're doing, and that's when you sent me this book.
You have then postulated the existence or the appearance in some time years ago of a celestial body which you, I think, named in that paper an intruder,
yes,
which may have collided with or somehow turned on their side both Uranus and Pluto.
It did a lot more than that, as a matter of fact. In that paper, we hypothesized that this intruder passed very close to Neptune, that it dislodged one of what we then think were many satellites of Neptune, and one of them became the planet Pluto. We actually think Pluto was an escaped satellite of Neptune. This will also take the orbit of Triton, the big satellite of Neptune, and reverse it. We'll take the orbit of the satellite Nereid and extend it outwards. We can produce all of the observed aspects of the satellite system of Neptune plus Pluto's orbit just with this one single intruding planet. Now, one of the things we did in 1978, having made this prediction that there was an additional planet, 10th or 12th, depending on your point of view, but it's the next one, we sort of put our money where our mouth was, as it were, and we went out and we started looking for this thing. And we've been searching for 12 years for this thing. We've been able to refine the search area somewhat, get it rather narrowed down. We do our predictions based on the observed anomalies in Uranus and Neptune. We actually are currently looking down in the region of Centaurus, which is just south of the constellation Libra, but very close to the area that you've talked about.
I think, Dr. Harrington, you have a pretty good picture, at least in your own mind, of what we're talking about, a big planet, a small planet.
But if it is in the kind of orbit that we describe here, it would have to be a planet that would have a mass something like 3 to 5 times the mass of the Earth. This would put it intermediate between the gaseous planets like Uranus and Neptune and the terrestrial planets that we have in the inner part of the solar system. So if this planet turns out to be in a 3,600-year orbit, then its mass will be correspondingly larger. But we're talking about something, it's a perfectly reasonable kind of planet. It looks like a good, nice planet, small enough that it's not going to be completely enveloped in gas, so it's perfectly capable of supporting life forms of one kind or another. This one here is the map of the solar system as we know it. The inner planets, this is the orbit of planet Pluto, and this here is the orbit that I have proposed for the 10th planet. Here's where we think it is right about now in its orbit. This is your orbit for the planet, and showing that it would come out of Sagittarius in biblical time, and that once you allow for precession, it would be around into Libra by now, and, which is, again, approximately the area that we're looking in.
NASA launched the Pioneer 10 spacecraft in 1972. It attached to it a golden plaque.
With this plaque, Pioneer carries a message to extraterrestrials about its home planet. Its symbols show the radio signature of our sun, where our planet is located, and what we looked like.
As Pioneer 10 journeys on beyond the outer known planets, the data it is sending back is also being used to seek a possible 10th planet. Indeed, a March 1992 NASA press release stated,
"Unexplained deviations in the orbits of Uranus and Neptune point to a large outer solar system body of 4 to 8 Earth masses on a highly tilted orbit, beyond 7 billion miles from the Sun." In the past 2 decades, astronomers have joined the search to look for one more planet in our own solar system. They designate such a planet Planet X, meaning both unknown and 10th.
maybe you wish to tell us in a few minutes the nature of those discoveries.
I'd be happy to, and you're absolutely right. And as a matter of fact, the date on here, I was just noticing, is 14 August 1978, which was just about 6 weeks after we discovered the fact that Pluto has a satellite. Once you have a satellite for a planet, you can determine how heavy it is. It turns out Pluto was very much smaller and lighter weight than we had thought, which meant that Pluto has no influence, no appreciable influence on the motions of the planets Uranus and Neptune. At that point, we voiced a hypothesis that this means that there is at least one yet to be discovered planet in the outer reaches of the solar system, and this naturally led directly to you and your interest in what we're doing, and that's when you sent me this book.
You have then postulated the existence or the appearance in some time eons ago of a celestial body which you, I think, named in that paper an intruder.
Yes.
Which may have collided with or somehow turned on their side both Uranus and Pluto.
It did a lot more than that, as a matter of fact. In that paper, we hypothesized that this intruder passed very close to Neptune, that it dislodged one of what we then think were many satellites of Neptune, and one of them became the planet Pluto. We actually think Pluto was an escaped satellite of Neptune. This will also take the orbit of Triton, the big satellite of Neptune, and reverse it. We'll take the orbit of the satellite Nereid and extend it outwards. We can produce all of the observed aspects of the satellite system of Neptune plus Pluto's orbit just with this one single intruding planet. One of the things we did in 1978, having made this prediction that there was an additional planet, 10th or 12th, depending on your point of view, but it's the next one, we sort of put our money where our mouth was, as it were, and we went out and we started looking for this thing. And we've been searching for 12 years for this thing. We've been able to refine the search area somewhat, get it rather narrowed down. We do our predictions based on the observed anomalies in Uranus and Neptune. We actually are currently looking down in the region of Centaurus, which is just south of the constellation Libra, but very close to the area that you've talked about.
I think, Dr. Harrington, you have a pretty good picture, at least in your own mind, of what we are talking about, a big planet, a small planet.
But if it is in the kind of orbit that we describe here, it would have to be a planet that would have a mass something like 3 to 5 times the mass of the Earth. This would put it intermediate between the gaseous planets like Uranus and Neptune and the terrestrial planets that we have in the inner part of the solar system. So if this planet turns out to be in a 3,600-year orbit, then its mass will be correspondingly larger. But we're talking about something it's a perfectly reasonable kind of planet. It looks like a good, nice planet, small enough that it's not going to be completely enveloped in gas, so it's perfectly capable of supporting life forms of one kind or another. This one here is a map of the solar system as we know it. The inner planets, this is the orbit of planet Pluto. And this here is the orbit that I have proposed for the 10th planet. And here's where we think it is right about now in its orbit. This is your orbit for the planet.
Yes.
And showing that it would come out of Sagittarius in biblical time, and that once you allow for precession, it would be around into Libra by now. Which is, again, approximately the area that we're looking in.
If Planet X exists, we are not alone in this solar system.
Astronomers are so sure of the 10th planet, they think there is nothing left but to name it. Alone he stretches out the heavens and treads upon the farthest deep. He arrives at the Great Bear, Orion and Sirius, and the constellations of the south. He smiles his face upon Taurus and Aries. From Taurus to Sagittarius he shall go.
Backside alignment events. See how these different colored lines are almost straight? The second event of that year happens a little bit later in the year because the black star is continuing to move left. If the black star was in the same place out there in the same spot sitting still, which nothing sits still out there, then this event would happen at the same time each year, but it happens later. See the pattern? Now, these are alignment events: near side alignment, backside alignment. Okay, now let's go to stellarium, and let me try to help you understand. This is for Bonnie particularly. Let me try to help you understand outside orbit position. Now, let's see how Saturn's in the Libra constellation. The black star is in the Libra constellation. So let's just pretend for a minute that Saturn is representative of the black star. Let's just pretend for a minute. Okay, now I'm going to grab hold of the Earth here. And this is where the Earth will be whenever we come into alignment. Look at the date down here. You see how it's May? This is the problem time, May of 2014. When the Earth is around in here, then we're going to come into alignment with Saturn. The black star is right in here somewhere. Okay, now you got magnetic portal connections that are running from the Sun to the Earth, from the Earth to the black star, which is represented by Saturn here, right? And from the Sun to the black star, and from the Sun to Saturn, there's going to be a convergence of all these magnetic portal connections in the month of May. This is our next near side alignment. But now let's bring this backwards, all the way back around to where we're on the back side. See, we're on the back side of the Sun. The black star is over here. Here's the Sun, here's the Earth. We're on the back side of the Sun for 6 months, and we're on the near side of the Sun for 6 months. Okay, now whenever I get to about October, can I grab it and pull it back? It's not working for me. Let's try it again. Here we go. October the 25th is when we had our big Japan quake. 7.2. We had our solar flares leading up to. We had singular 3.3 event on October 28th. Okay. Now this is when we were on the back side of the Sun relative to the black star. Now this, all I'm describing right now, is the near side alignment and the back side alignment, just alignment events. That's what all of these lines represent: a near side alignment and a back side alignment. But you see these empty spots here on the side? These empty spots are the areas where Earth reaches outside orbit position. Now let's go back over here. So here we are at the alignment October, it's very near the backside alignment on October 25th. Now, just over 3 months later, here we go. Notice how the Earth comes around in orbit. Now we're orbiting away from where the black star is going to eventually reach perihelion, because the black star is coming in this way. It's prograde, coming in the same way. So we are going in the opposite direction as to where it's going. That means that the magnetic portal connection is getting longer. It's being stretched. Okay, now when we get to outside orbit position, which is, see, we got to make the right angle. And we're just about there right now. Sure wish this thing would work like I want it to. Here we go. Okay, right about there. Now the black star is still trailing Saturn just by a little bit, so you don't quite have a 90 there. Right? But the black star is a little bit behind Saturn. That's why. Okay, so this is the 90-degree angle that I'm talking about. 90 degrees. You had the same thing on this side, on the summer side, July the 7th, 2013. That's when we reached outside orbit position on this side. So this is outside orbit, this is outside orbit. This side over here is the near orbit alignment, the near side alignment. This is the back side alignment. So if you imagine this is like a football game, whenever we get around here to make this right angle, that begins the first quarter of each orbit cycle. That first quarter of each orbit cycle begins later each year. You go back to the last orbit cycle, the outside orbit position here was December the 28th, 29th, right in that area. This is the time when we had the minimum number of indicator quakes, 2.5 to 4 magnitude, 146 we had. Now I'm looking for a low value now, but the dynamic inside the Earth core has changed and this modeling is being thrown off. But anyway, this is the outside orbit position where the Earth is right here. And what happens now, watch the Earth as it comes around in orbit. We're getting ready to start heading towards the black star. We're back on the back side of the Sun. We're moving away from the black star. All that turns around right about here. And that's where we are right now, coming into February the 1st. Now, identifying exactly what date that we reach outside orbit position, there's lots of indicators, but I have to use hindsight in order to tell. It's going to take me a couple of weeks to be able to know for sure. But then I'm going to be able to fill in all the data for the Japan event and these X-class flares, correctly identifying this point as the backside alignment. So I'm identifying 4 key features for each orbit cycle. When the cycle begins, this cycle is just about to begin again. We're in the 4th quarter right now, and the game is almost over for this orbit cycle. Now we're beginning the 2014 orbit cycle that begins in the month of February. Now whenever we move around in orbit just a little bit, right, then the moon alignments could have something to do with it. If you can see, I don't know if you can see or not, but the moon is coming into alignment, and it's coming into alignment. We're getting closer to the spring, okay, when the spring tides come, and it could be that this is going to be part of what causes these 7 magnitude quakes to kick off. They kick off between a week and 2 weeks apart. That's what's going to happen after February the 1st that I'm looking for. So you have 2 outside orbit positions, and you have 2 alignments. There's an outside orbit position, and if you go all the way around 6 months and a few days later, then you have another outside orbit position that's going to be around over on this side. Okay, we notice that nothing stands still. As we're going forward and backwards in time, there's nothing that's just sitting out there in space. Saturn is moving slower than Jupiter, is moving slower than Mars, is moving slower. As you get closer to the sun, everything is moving more quickly. Things take much longer. Saturn takes 30 years to go around one time. Okay, so I hope this helps you to understand, Bon, that we are now reaching this position right over here. And I was asked today, Kurt called me, he wanted to know when I'm starting up the radio shows again, and I really don't know more now than I knew when the Earth was back in here. I need to get beyond outside orbit position, so I'm going to be coming onto the radio and just regurgitating stuff that I'm giving you guys in these 15-minute updates. It's really not necessary. You know, I'm not in this to make money. I'm not in this to be rich and famous or anything. I'm just really honestly wanting to do the research and share it with you guys when there's something to share. If there's nothing to share, then what's the purpose? What's the purpose of it? My work in the past has been used to desensitize the masses, and I also have to stagger my steps because of artificial intelligence. That's what shut Terrell's research group down in the first place. And so we kind of creep around, we work together, we don't communicate as much, we try to stagger step, and as if we're playing chess with artificial intelligence. That's the reason that we're still in the game, in my view. You know, the most gifted man that I met was Michael Owens, feature writer. Go back to 2012 newsletter, volume number 9, and you will see. Look in those volumes right just before that, and you will see that he's a very gifted man, very knowledgeable astronomer. He knew that thing was out there, and he was tracking DA14 when it first came out of the Leo constellation. It was nudged out of orbit by the black star. Back then, moving from Leo into Virgo. Okay, so he's not around anymore. And she made the comment about how the NSA and stuff, they're using the telephones and your computers and things like. They don't need any of that stuff. They've got chemtrailing. They have HARP. They have artificial intelligence. They are manipulating the nanites that are inside your body right now. They know your perspiration. They know your heartbeat. They know they hear every word you say and everything you hear already. But there's far too much information for a human being to assimilate. That's why they have artificial intelligence. Super duper one works for the Council on Foreign Relations working groups. That's the real government of the United States. The little junior model is run by the Pentagon. The one that most of the lettered agency people think is real. They consult the Pentagon. But the big chicken in the chicken house works for the Council on Foreign Relations. It's covert op. And all the lettered agencies, most of them, they have a black op division that works with the Council on Foreign Relations. These are the elite. This is how they control and manipulate the puppet government in Washington, D.C. That's why Barack Obama is the president, because he's a CIA operative. He was groomed for the position even though he was born in Kenya. And he immigrated to Indonesia It's a direct violation of the law, but nobody cares. America is corrupt to the core. It's lawless, banana republic, and it's just a giant smokescreen that's put out there on the TV so that everybody can be lulled to sleep. That's what it is. And she's also commenting, Bonnie, I'm speaking directly to you. You're commenting about people waking up and stuff. That's not going to happen. People are sound asleep. The people that we serve in this investigation are the extreme few, less than one in 100, 1 in a million maybe, you know. And there's going to be no revolution or anything like that. The cattle are in the stall, they're being led to slaughter, and they're just going bah all the way. That's just the way that it works. We cannot help them. There's no way that we can reach them. There's way too much disinformation out there. Even the researchers I'm working with, they're led through rabbit holes, and you know, I have to help them to straighten out the rabbit hole stuff because it's so thick out there. Think about it if you're the House of Rothschild. I have 2 minutes here. And you're running an operation, the underground arc cities, where your elite are going to run. Well, how are you going to emerge from there after the Black Star leaves unless you have contingencies in place for taking care of Lone Wolf, for the Rambos that are out there, the people that are going to be waiting for you? It's going to include a artificial intelligence and a artificial intelligence controlled binary weapon. That's what they're going to release as they're going into the underground arc city. That's the H1N1, the bird flu, and all that stuff you see. That stuff's going to happen. Later, though, is there going to be something big at the Super Bowl? I doubt it. They don't want to wake Lone Wolf up. They don't want him deploying before they have a chance to run to their underground arc cities. They want business as usual. HARP, weather modification. It's being used to keep things normal as possible, because without the HARP-driven weather modification, things would be far worse. They want people to be complacent. They want them to be like sheep going to slaughter. They do not want to wake you up. They do not want to wake up the sleepers that are right in their environment, because the real civil war would be between the lettered agencies and the military that are not invited to the underground arc cities. That's who they do not want to wake up, because that would create the civil war that would kill everybody. And that's why everybody's not going to wake up. If everybody woke up today, everybody would charge on Walmart to get the last box of food and kill each other. It would be mass pandemonium. So anyway, those are my views. I hope that this is a good explanation. I know there'll be critics out there saying, oh, you should have said this, should have said that. Pardon me, but I'm just trying to keep it simple and use the same terms over and over again for people that are not astronomers. And with that, I'm out of time, and I'll see you guys next time.
We used to call it Jack Parsons Laboratory.
Yes.
Which I think is probably where the original JPL came from.
Yes.
Because Jack Parsons established it. Anyhow, they sent out a couple of Pioneers satellites back in '82 just to try to determine if there was some truth to it. Mm-hmm. And the Pioneers apparently came back with data which said not only yes, but hell yes. And the Pioneers concluded, the Pioneer satellite data concluded. So, wow, astronomers were troubled by that. Whew. Could this thing be real? And well, what did they do? They sent out what they called an infrared astronomical satellite. I think they called it IRAS anyhow, and this was done in '83. They sent the IRAS out, taking infrared pictures all around the ecliptic, above and below. And apparently IRAS got 2 giant positive responses that yes, the 12th planet, the 10th planet, however you want to call it, yes, it's real. And that's when the lid slams down.
So it's out there, it's on its way back in, right?
According to the Sumerians in Sitchin, apparently it is. And if you're a student of history, as one of my majors, its last pass was 1600 BC. The Sumerians and Sitchin and all of those say it has an orbit of 3,600 years. Mm-hmm. So as like many of us, you know, I count on my fingers and toes and figure out, well, 1600 BC, it has an orbit of 3,600 years. Wow, it's due. Well, apparently it is.
So
Now,
why are they keeping this a secret?
Because
you're an expert on secrets.
Listen, every time Nibiru would make a pass, it was not always devastating. It would depend on whether the planet Earth and Nibiru were on the same side of the sun at the same time. And if we were on the same side of the sun at the same time, all hell would break loose on planet Earth. Well, apparently, the last pass triggered the explosion of Santorini, Thera, the volcano in the Mediterranean, in the Aegean Sea, blew its top, brought to a close the great, great Minoan civilization. Among other things, it affected Egypt. It's all in the records, apparently. There are even historians and theologians who say that Santorini's explosion is exactly what you're reading about when the plagues and all hit Egypt that allowed Moses to get the Israelites out. But if you look at 1600 BC and figuring that was a relatively recent pass, it's due now, and apparently the guys in the astronomical observatories know it. And that, again, is above top secret. Let me give you a tiny example. For a number of years ago, there were two brilliant guys working at the Naval Observatory in Washington. Tom Van Flandern is one, who I hope you've interviewed.
No, but yeah, please continue, and we'd love to do that.
He's no longer with the Naval Observatory. The other one was the chief astronomer at the observatory, a brilliant man by the name of Robert Harrington.
Right.
And Harrington gave an interview to Zecharia Sitchin a number of years ago. I think it was 91 or so. Where he came right out and said, Dr. Sitchin, we are interested in this because it ties in perfectly with the work you've done on the Sumerians and the ancient planet Nibiru. He said, we found it, it's real, we have photographs of it, and he says from what we can put together, it's a rather nice planet. It's about 2.5 times the size of the Earth. Apparently it's heading toward the system, the center of the system. We've concluded about everything about it except that we haven't named it. And Zecharia spoke up and he says, it's already been named. He says, you simply call it Nibiru, as the Sumerians called it, the planet of the crossing. Well, Mrs. Sitchin and I were in agreement. I miss her. She died about a year ago. She was convinced that Robert Harrington had died because somebody bumped him off, because he had the courage to come out and give Zecharia this interview. I don't know whether you've seen it or not. It's on tape.
No, I haven't seen it, but we interviewed Lucas Scantamburlo about this subject, and he's also talked about Robert Harrington.
Yeah, well, Harrington gave the interview to Zecharia, and it's on a video called Are We Alone? And I think you can pick it up at the conference here next week.
Okay.
I have a copy, and I sent a copy to Neil Freer, who's a man you should interview.
Okay, well, we're in touch with Neil. He's a very interesting guy.
Oh, he's brilliant.
He's a brilliant guy.
He's brilliant. He just recently came out and admitted that he's had an intimate interrelationship with extraterrestrial intelligence since he was a child.
Well, he's always talking about the Anunnaki. I do know this.
Well, he wrote a book called Breaking the God Spell. And he has supported Zechariah's work for years.
I have a question, Bob, if I may, about the provenance of this information, in the sense that Zecharia Sitchin's work is very well documented, and a lot of people watching this video will be very familiar with his books and with all the intelligent commentary about that. Are you saying that you have additional information based on your contacts within the Old Boys Network? Or are you doing a neat presentation of...
Many of my conclusions are my own, you know, and they, in many respects, correlate perfectly with Sitchin's work, which is, you know, Neil has told me, he says, you know, Zachariah really should get the Nobel Prize. But I don't know what they would grant it to him in what field. But he's such an outstanding scholar in what he's done, and the Earth Chronicles is what he calls all of his work. Well, I think there's 7 or 8 of them now.
I have 2 questions. One's a minor one to do with celestial mechanics. And it's just something that I've never understood, and I've heard this question from many other people as well. That if Nibiru comes from the outer reaches of the solar system, it's going to be an icy rock, which isn't going to be the kind of place that any beings could live on or would want to live on. And researcher Andy Lloyd, who you probably have heard about, has theorized that what they're seeing in the photographs that you referred to as an orange object is actually a brown dwarf, with the possibility of Nibiru being one of its moons, if you like. And there's a lot of debate about how to apply what Sitchin seems to have been saying to the real practicalities of life on an icy rock out in the orbit of Pluto. And I wondered if you knew or had anything to say about that.
No, it's not an icy rock. And yes, when it makes its long journey out and back, it gets so far away from the sun that the sun is probably no more than a little tiny prick of light, a little tiny pinpoint. And if you would think that it would be naturally icy cold. No, apparently the planet, like many planets in the system here, generate its own heat. It has in its core a generating heat system very much like our own. We have a system within the core of this planet that has been described as a thermonuclear reaction, very similar to the sun. Now, most of the life and all of the bounty and all of the beauty of life on this planet comes from our going around this beautiful sun. But I don't think Nibiru is an icy rock. No, I think, first of all, that it probably generates enough of its own heat, and I think they probably did indeed create for themselves, with the advanced technology that they have, a kind of a Dyson sphere. Are you familiar with that? Mm-hmm. You know what brilliant British astronomer, I think, Freeman Dyson, said some years ago, that an incredibly advanced technology will have the ability to enclose its planet and retain not only its heat, but its atmosphere. And I suspect that the Anunnaki have done that to Nibiru, and they probably did it, good enough, hundreds of thousands, maybe 1 million years ago. So the planet, I think the color from it, the dull red golden color, is a result of that envelope of gold shell that they've created. They've created for themselves a Dyson sphere around their planet. And I suspect that any advanced technology will ultimately do the same, simply because it makes sense. It's a practical thing.
But if they had that degree of engineering capability, why wouldn't they just live on Mars instead of hurtling through the solar system?
Well, they weren't the original occupants of Mars. Okay. They used Mars as a way station, and they've reactivated it, and I agree with Zachariah on that they've reactivated their way system, their way station there. They used to drop off on Mars on their way here.
In Revelations, when the opening of the 6th seal comes, from what I've been told, that's very accurate, because that's exactly what's going to happen. There's going to be a massive earthquake when it locks onto us, As it goes past us, we're going to follow it right upside down. The oceans are just going to be roaring from pole to pole, as you could well guess they would, because if you take a planet that's 7,000 miles across and roll it upside down in 30 minutes, you're going to have some real serious problems with wind and water. We should be preparing to expect this thing.
Yes, I was saying in the beginning that we do take our inspiration from these ancient Sanskrit writings of India. They're collectively called the Vedas. Among them are the Puranas. Purana is a Sanskrit word. It means history. Now, these histories tell of human civilizations on this planet going back millions of years.
How do we know those are accurate?
Well, that was our question too. Richard Thompson and I, we thought, well, if there's any accuracy to those statements, there must be some factual evidence to back them up. Now, when we looked in the current textbooks, of course, we didn't find any such evidence, but we thought, well, let's look a little bit further. Practically speaking, archaeologists and anthropologists have buried almost as much evidence as they've dug up. In other words,
or perhaps overlooked, cast aside.
Well, yes, cast aside, and there have been some outright cases of suppression where people who have reported such things have had their careers ruined.
Hi, my name is David Morrison. I'm a NASA space scientist, and I want to talk to you very briefly about Nibiru. I'm doing this because I received a note from a 12-year-old girl recently that said she wondered if the video I made 2 years ago was still valid, that she and her classmates were scared about Nibiru, and could I please explain, from a science point of view, why we know Nibiru is not real and is not a danger. You know, the simplest thing to say is just that there is no credible evidence whatever for the existence of Nibiru. There are no pictures, there's no...
You can't hide it anymore, people. Even with the chemtrailing, there it is. Directly behind the sun.
I received a note from a 12-year-old girl recently that said she wondered if the video I made 2 years ago was still valid, that she and her classmates were scared about Nibiru, and could I please explain, from a science point of view, why we know Nibiru is not real and is not a danger. You know, the simplest thing to say is just that there is no credible evidence whatever for the existence of Nibiru. There are no pictures, there's no tracking, there's no astronomical observations. In fact, the origin of the name is a little weird. Nibiru
The reason why modern science can't find Nibiru is because of the orbit. It is below our field of vision.
I'm doing this because I received a note from a 12-year-old girl recently that said she wondered if the video I made 2 years ago was still valid, that she and her classmates were scared about Nibiru, and could I please explain, from a science point of view, why we know Nibiru is not real and is not a danger. You know, the simplest thing to say is just that there is no credible evidence whatever for the existence of Nibiru. There are no pictures, there's no tracking, there's no astronomical observation.
We flew over this enormous Jakobshavn Glacier, the most productive glacier in the world. The ice sheet used to be much smoother on top. Now it's just fractured on top. Conrad Steffens, the famous climatologist, said it looked as if a huge hammer had come down on top of the ice sheet. There's surface melting, which is really accelerated over the years. Huge lakes and thaw ponds. These are these beautiful blue eyes you see in the ice from the air. In other words, yes, it's really melting rapidly in ways that we're just discovering now.
Some stunning before and after photos. And for people that can't grasp what is taking place on the West Coast, show them this video. Show them these photos before and after of what is taking place here. This is Shasta Lake, before and after. Another view, and you can see from the bridge here, it shows how dramatically this area has dropped. You can see here at the dam, also showing the land. And I'll leave you guys on this one. This is Folsom Lake. Look at that. That's how bad it is out west, folks. Spread the word. Let people
an extraordinary opening in space or time that connects travelers to distant realms. A good portal is a shortcut, a guide, a door into the unknown, if only they actually existed. It turns out that they do, sort of. And a NASA-funded researcher at the University of Iowa has figured out how to find them. We call them X-points, or electron diffusion regions, explains plasma physicist Jack Scudder of the University of Iowa. They're places where the magnetic field of Earth connects to the magnetic field of the Sun, creating an uninterrupted path leading from our own planet to the Sun's atmosphere 93 million miles away. Observations by NASA's Themis spacecraft and Europe's cluster probes suggest that these magnetic portals open and close.
Not gonna lie, my heart's racing. No, it's going
Solar system's a pretty big place. You know, not only do we have the sun where the most of the mass is at, but we have 8 identified planets. We got the 4 inner planets, and we've got the 4 outer planets. Well, there's a lot of other stuff that's going on. What about all this other stuff in the system? We know that there's rocks orbiting the sun in their own orbits. Most of these are categorized in astronomy as existing in the asteroid belt between Jupiter and Mars. So most of these objects are going to be out here in the asteroid belt. Some asteroids are going to be, kind of following Jupiter a little bit, possibly being pushed by Jupiter's gravity in the front. Those are our shepherding asteroids. There's lots and lots of dust and stuff within the entire solar system, and there's even lots of bodies out just right outside of the solar system, past the orbit of Neptune, in the Kuiper belt and Oort cloud. Now, so there's a lot more going on than just the sun and planets. Now, thinking of the term asteroids, all an asteroid is a big clump of rock. So an asteroid is a big, huge clump of rock that's hanging out in space. And they can be all different sizes, all different shapes, and they're really only going to be classified as an asteroid if we're talking about objects that are inside the orbit of Jupiter. So here's Jupiter, the great red spot, and so anything past Jupiter going out in our solar system is going to be classified as something else. So an asteroid is a general term. It's not a very specific term. It's not a recognized term, but it's really easy for us to just use and say it's an asteroid. It's a big rock in space. Asteroids is such a general term that if I were to have the group asteroids, within that group would be all of our meteors. All of our meteors would be in the asteroid group. And some of our dwarf planets. So we'd have some dwarf planets that would be considered asteroids. So we got dwarf planets that are considered asteroids. And anything else that's within around the orbit of Jupiter that might have been classified as other things. So we have some other stuff like various gas, dust, just stuff floating in space. Space is mainly empty, but when we do find matter in space, that matter tends to clump together and make objects. Now, meteoroids are not a technical term, but they are still in use for the term meteoroids. Now think about our asteroids. Our asteroids are these big lumps of rock, sometimes kilometers and miles across, sometimes only a couple hundred feet across. But what happens if a small piece of some asteroid breaks off, and now we have this tiny dot, pebble in the sky, something maybe a meter across, maybe there's something the size of a human being, and this is what we would call a meteoroid, this itty-bitty tiny bit of rock. Meteoroids are kind of like the junk left over from planetesimals in the early solar system. They're from collisions. They're just pieces that fly all over the place. And a lot of the times these meteoroids are going to travel in clusters from when an asteroid got blown apart. And this is how we get our meteor showers, is these small, tiny objects in the sky that we really can't classify and name, but they still smash into the Earth's atmosphere and we can see them. And that's how we mainly interact with meteoroids, because they're little bits and pieces of flotsam floating around in our solar system. Here's a nice, decent picture of a meteoroid hitting our atmosphere. So as it's a meteoroid as it hits the atmosphere. And then as it hits the atmosphere, it stops being a meteoroid, and it starts to be a meteor. And that's why we have meteor showers. They're seasonal, and what the Earth is doing is the Earth, not usually that you see an Earth with a red outline, but we're going to stick with it. The Earth is moving through these clumps of meteoroid debris that is hanging out in space. So that's where we get meteoroids. Meteoroids are these small objects that interact with our atmosphere. We see them as meteors, and then we see meteor showers as they smash into our atmosphere. Now, we don't want to confuse meteors with their cousins, comets. Whenever we see a meteor, so those are not comets. Whenever we see a meteor, they are moving through our atmosphere very, very fast, and they go pew, and then they burn up. They either burn up, sometimes if you get a larger meteoroid, it'll strike the ground, and then it becomes a meteorite, you know, all these words tied together and everything. But don't confuse a meteor or a meteoroid with a comet, because the meteor is going to travel through our atmosphere very quickly. Whereas a comet, comets are not traveling through our atmosphere. A comet is hanging out in space, and they're far away. And the tail from these comets, the tail that's coming out from some body right here, is not because it's burning up in some atmosphere like Earth. That tail is caused by heat from the sun and the solar wind. And the reason that they form those tails is that if we draw the solar system, we got a sun, we're going to put Neptune way out here. Neptune has a little solar storm going on it. We don't know why. There's not enough energy out there, but it does anyway. And outside of Neptune are objects that come into contact with each other. And then as these objects come in towards the sun and form a giant loop orbiting the sun. Now what happens is those objects are going to cross that frost line. They cross the frost line and they start to melt. And this is where they really, really become a comet, because the heat from the sun and the solar wind is going to push on the material that is melting on this comet, so it forms a tail. And the tail gets longer the closer that comet is to the sun. Common misconception is that the tail of a comet is pointing behind the comet like it's a rocket ship. Comets aren't rocket ships. We don't have a rocket ship comet. That's a rocket. No. Comets don't do that. Comets don't do that. They form a tail because of the energy coming off the sun that forms their tail. And once those comets travel back past that frost line, they'll re-solidify. They'll re-solidify out here past the orbit of Neptune. They'll start to solidify somewhere in here, and they become kind of a solid rock out in this area out here. So it's only a comet because you have some sort of object that travels past the orbit of Neptune, down into the inner solar system area, begins to melt, forms a tail because of the heat from the sun. Dwarf planets. Now, dwarf planets, we've said that dwarf planets can be in the group that we consider an asteroid, and they can also be in a group called trans-Neptunian objects and Neptunian objects, etc. So there's other terms going on here that are more technical, but in general, you should know that a dwarf planet, it satisfies at least two of the rules for being a planet. It's going around the sun, and it's round because gravity has pulled in and made it round. But it hasn't cleared its orbit. This is the dwarf planet series. Why so serious, series? Because I'm not a planet. So the dwarf planet series exists in our asteroid belt. The dwarf planet series is pretty cool because it contains 1/3 of all of the mass for the entire asteroid belt, yet Ceres is much smaller than our moon. Now, that would be a dwarf planet that would be inside that line we drew for ourselves earlier, where anything past Jupiter, we really aren't going to call that asteroids. But dwarf planets can also exist outside of that zone. This is the dwarf planet Pluto. This is the best image we really have of Pluto. It doesn't really look like much. We will learn far more about Pluto and Ceres in 2015. There's 2 missions that are going out in that direction. They're separate missions. We've got the Dawn spacecraft that's going to come up to Ceres in 2015 and say, yo, and we're going to get some fantastic pictures of this dwarf planet. We've also got the New Horizons probe in 2015 that's going to swing by Pluto, and that's going to take a picture of Pluto and Pluto's moon, Charon. And we've recently found that Pluto has other objects floating around it that would be considered moons of a dwarf planet. So thinking about general ways of classifying things in the sky, it's all going to originate with the sun. And in this lecture, what we're talking about is we have 2 classifications. One involves our friend Jupiter. The other involves our friend Neptune, both of whom have storms on them. We don't really know why Neptune's got a storm on it, but it does. It's just really far away from the sun to have that kind of storm. Now the frost line, because Jupiter's kind of moved since it's formed, is just past Jupiter. So thinking of this, when we have objects that are large, they tend to hang out in the asteroid belt. So we have these larger asteroid belt objects, and they have to be an asteroid. We would only refer to them as an asteroid if they're inside of this line of Jupiter's orbit. Don't confuse that with the frost line. That yellow line is referring to the orbit of Jupiter. And then when small objects, we really only see them here on Earth when they cram into our atmosphere. Any itty-bitty tiny objects hanging out in the solar system that we really can't classify or name, those are our meteoroids. And dwarf planets can exist just about anywhere. We've got Ceres in the asteroid belt containing 1/3 of the mass of all of the asteroid belt. And then way out here past Neptune, we have Pluto. Pluto's out here like, oh, why am I not a planet anymore? It's because we found all of your sisters and brothers that are hanging out past Neptune too. And we call those guys our dwarf planets. And sometimes those trans-Neptunian objects, those objects passed out Neptune, they will get dislodged and they're going to come in towards the inner solar system. And when they do, they make this nice long orbit around the sun, coming way back out past Neptune at the end. They form tails going away from the sun. And they only start forming their tails when? Oh yeah, right after they've crossed this frost line. And when they're past the frost line, they don't got any tails because they're all frozen balls of snot. And who are we talking about? We're talking about comets.
There are 8 major planets. Mercury, which is closest to the Sun and very barren. Venus, with her thick atmosphere and furious volcanoes. Earth, the only known planet to host life. And Mars, the red planet, a neighbor that has had a lot of human-made visitors. Farther out is Jupiter, a giant made of gas, with over 60 moons. Saturn with its mighty ring system, and finally, Uranus and Neptune, the ice giants. Beyond them lie huge asteroid fields and some dwarf planets, like Pluto and Eris. All these heavenly bodies revolve around the Sun. It's the center of our solar system, and also its superpower.
It's called Make-Make after the god of the ancient civilization that lived on Easter Island. It was nicknamed the Easter Bunny as it was discovered around Easter time. The International Astronomical Union said it wasn't a good name, so it was given the name Make-Make. It's a rocky, icy planet, very far out, very cold, which poses no threat of any kind to the Earth or the inner solar system. It's so far out, it takes 308 years to complete a single orbit of the Sun. Its orbit is fairly elliptical, which varies between 45.791 astronomical units and 53.74 astronomical units. Some fearmongers, as soon as a planet is discovered, or a dwarf planet, they try and say that that is proof for their paranoid, fearful theories. Obviously, they're mistaken. Ceres is the smallest dwarf planet in the solar system, and it's the only dwarf planet in the main asteroid belt. It was discovered on January the 1st, 1801. It's named after an ancient Roman goddess. The goddess Ceres was responsible for growing of plants, the harvest, and motherly love. In 2006, the International Astronomical Union decided to upgrade Ceres from an asteroid to a dwarf planet with a diameter of about 950 kilometers. Ceres is by far the largest and most massive object in the asteroid belt. Without any cause or consequence, there is no reason to assume or believe that Ceres poses any threat to the Earth. I have read what some conspiracy theorists have said on this object. They have suggested it is a moon of Nibiru, or it's the remains of a planet which once was destroyed by Nibiru. No evidence or proof has ever been brought forward. Ceres is not a Nibiru-like object or a danger to the Earth. The dwarf planet Eris is a trans-Neptunian object, bigger than Pluto. It's the largest dwarf planet known. At 2,400 kilometers in diameter, Eris orbits the Sun once every 557 years, and it has an elliptical, egg-shaped orbit, tilted at an angle of 44 degrees. It has a moon called Dysnomia. It was discovered on the 5th of January 2005. It was originally called Xena, after the main character of the television series Xena Warrior Princess. It was officially named Eris on September 13th, 2006. The name itself, Eris, is the Greek goddess of strife, discord, and rivalry. Under the specifications of what constitutes a planet, Eris, along with Pluto and the other dwarf planets, are recognised as being just that, dwarf planets. They are not recognised as being full planets, like with the larger bodies within the solar system. There has been a lot of fear-mongering about the possibility of Eris coming into the centre of the solar system, or by some quirk affecting the Earth. There is no proof of any kind that this will happen. It is merely wild speculation on the part of conspiracy theorists, and it serves no good purpose. It is completely unproven, and the facts, the genuine, solid facts, are easily attainable. The moon of Eris, Dysnomia, was discovered in 2005. Its name is derived from the ancient Greek, meaning lawlessness. The name also means the daughter of the Greek goddess Eris, so giving it that name is quite fitting. The reason why I mention this particular moon is because people have claimed that this is in fact a UFO. Dysnomia is, according to some people, a UFO, because it's not causing the wobble effect they would expect. And I haven't confirmed this information with, like, any of the actual scientific institutions. They haven't talked to NASA or any of the great universities studying this particular object. They just simply said it must be a UFO, when clearly there is no evidence of that whatsoever. Perhaps the strangest dwarf planet out there is Haumea. It only has 1/3 of the mass of Pluto, but is shaped so strangely it makes it unique, as far as we know, within the solar system. Its unusual shape is believed to be the result of a large impact in its distant past. It has two very small moons, Hayeka and Namaka. It's believed that these moons were originally part of the same planet, but due to the impact, it broke apart the planet as it was, making it as it is, a small, strangely shaped object with two very small moons. Some conspiracy theorists have already suggested that this planet is in fact the home world of the reptilians, or, as some other conspiracy theorists have suggested, it's a giant UFO, or it's Nibiru, or Planet X.
This message is about Comet Lyson. There were 4 comets coming in. These were not comets. NASA reported that the comets melted into our sun, yet satellite images proved nothing was anywhere near our sun at the designated times. The only report that was true is that something was coming in. It's the Nibiru system. They're here in our solar system, for heavenly bodies, and they're hiding. I know you think this is impossible. Hell man, give me some of what you're smoking, yo. It's true. Check this. 3 planets and a dwarf star disappeared into our solar systems. Where could you possibly hide 3 planets and a dwarf star? Our gas giants Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune. What is a gas giant? A planet that is primarily made of gas. Gas is compressible and easy to dissipate into space. All of these planets have changed appearance in the last year. Why are Anunnaki here just waiting? Because we are not finished converting our Earth into a planet worth stealing. They are not our friends, gods or saviors. This is their business. We are their slaves. And if anyone has any objections about the way mankind has been treated, I would suggest you speak up now. By 2016, a billion more will be dead. By 2039, only a few remain.